Good morning, brothers and sisters. Pastor Steve here. Thank you for joining me for this devotion. Whether you're listening to the podcast or watching the video, I'm thankful that you are part of this discipleship process here at First Baptist and reading the Bible with us. Today we are in the 5th chapter of the book of Joshua, and they've crossed the Jordan River. They've had the worship service that we talked about yesterday, with the 12 stones and all of that. And now here in chapter 5 is really interesting because they're camped near Jericho after having crossed the Jordan River, but they've not attacked Jericho yet. And this chapter really speaks to weakness and vulnerability and trust in God and obedience in God during those moments of weakness and vulnerability. As I said, they're camped near Jericho. Haven't attacked it yet. And what does God tell them to do next? God tells Joshua to have all the men circumcise all the men, which means they would not be ready for battle for a while because of being circumcised. Now, you might ask, it says you're circumcised a second time in verse 2. So just look at verse 2 for a moment. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make for yourself flint knives and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time. What? Well, when you read the whole chapter, what we discover is that the Jewish people who left Egypt with Moses more than 40 years earlier had all been circumcised in keeping with their tradition and, the commandment God had given Abraham. But during the wandering in the wilderness for those 40 years, the parents did not circumcise their boys, their children. Now they've crossed into the promised land, and before they go into their first battle, God says, Joshua, they all need to be circumcised. And that left them vulnerable and weak to attack. When you look at verse 8, now when they had finished circumcising all the nation, so all the men, all the boys, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed, which is not a quick process. And so if an enemy, say Jericho, had attacked them while they were recuperating from this circumcision, they would have been in trouble. They were very weak, very exposed, very vulnerable. And from a human perspective, you've just crossed the river, you're camped near Jericho, and from a human perspective, it's not smart to circumcise all the men, all the warriors, and all the boys. It's not smart. It's dangerous. It makes you susceptible to attack. You wouldn't be able to fight very effectively. Yet, from the perspective of God and His people, it was an act of obedience, an act of faith, an act of trust, an act of submission. And what they may not have fully known, maybe on some level did, but maybe not fully, was that God was taking care of them the whole time, even during those moments of vulnerability and weakness while they were recuperating from the circumcision. Because chapter 5, verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1, this is before the circumcision. Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, so on the side of the river where the Jews are now encamped, all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. In other words, the miracle of God in holding back the waters of the Jordan River so the Jews could cross into the promised land put so much fear in the Canaanites, including the people in Jericho, they did not dare attack. God had already prepared the enemies so that the Israelis could be protected by putting fear. Their hearts melted away. And then near the end of the chapter, this is again before they attack Jericho, starting at verse 13. It came about when Joshua was by Jericho. He went out to just see the city, to look at it. When Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And when a soldier is standing with his sword drawn, he's ready for battle. So here's this in verse 13, this man with his sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries? Are you for us or for the people of Canaan, for the people in the city of Jericho? Verse 14. And he said, the man with the sword, no, rather I indeed come now as captain of the host of the Lord. It was the captain of God's angel army. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what is my Lord to say to his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host, the captain of the angels of the army of God, if you will, said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. What really struck me was that from the human perspective, it didn't make any sense to circumcise all the men before going into battle. I mean, you have an extended period of time when the men were vulnerable to attack. They were weak. And yet God was protecting them. Because before the circumcision, God, through the miracle of parting the Jordan River, had already melted the hearts of the Canaanites so that they were afraid to attack the people of God. And then secondly, the whole time, God's army of angels was there looking over the Jewish people. God was taking care of. Listen, when obeying God, when doing what's right puts you in a position of vulnerability or weakness from the human perspective, quote unquote, but you're doing it because God's told you to do it, because it's the godly thing, the righteous thing, the right thing, the just thing to do, just trust God. He's got your back. Just because something doesn't make sense from the standpoint of earth doesn't mean it's wrong. God always knows what he's doing, and he's always with you. So trust him. Always trust him. Just always obey him. That's the word for today. God bless you. Look forward to being with you tomorrow.